Hello, and welcome to today's presentation, Agile Leadership, the delicate balance between standardizing operations and pursuing innovation. We'll be looking at Agile leadership and talking about why Agile, what Agile is, and how to start being a more Agile agency. In addition, we'll hear from one of Iowa's regional educational service agencies, Northwest AEA, and learn about how they are rolling out Agile in their agency. My name is Deborah Cleveland, and I'm an instructional designer at AEA Learning Online. Laura Williams also works with AEA Learning Online as the 21st Century Learning Specialist and Work-Based Learning Coordinator. And I have to give Laura a special shout out because she is the one who introduced me to Agile and Scrum, so she's sort of my sensei in this work. So thanks, Laura. And Katie Evenson has been leading the charge in her AEA Northwest AEA, and she is the executive director at that agency. So thank you too for joining us, and we look forward to hearing you later in the presentation. As we get started, I want to take a step back in time. And I'm not just talking a little step, I'm talking about a really big step. I want us to go back to a time when most humans are hunting and gathering for food. And I want you to imagine you are part of a group who has decided they're tired of eating nuts and berries and they want something more to eat. They want meat. So it is decided that they're going to make an attempt to catch an animal. They decide to carry rocks to the top of the cliff and launch them at a herd of animals in hopes that one or more of them will get hit by the rocks and they will catch it. Leading the project is Caveman Chuck, project lead. Now, Project Chuck is really focused on being successful. He wants his team to succeed, and so he sets up some guidance and some goals and some information that he thinks is going to help. He tells his team that the goal is to carry 40 rocks to the top of the cliff each day. He defines the path that must be used to carry the rocks to the top of the cliff. He says each rock must weigh at least 20 pounds and measure 15 by 15 inches. He asks each person to total their tally of rocks on a tablet and submit it by 5 p.m. Tallies should include a description of each rock's shape and color. Individual daily totals are then displayed. Now, his group have some interesting suggestions. One person comes to him and says, instead of each of us carrying a rock up the hill, what if we stood in a long line and just passed the rocks from one person to the next? Another person suggests that he had seen a group of people who had used a small sharp rock and some rope and tied it to the end of a stick and made a spear to get the animals. Unfortunately, our project lead Chuck does not want to take any risks and says, nope, we're sticking to the plan. Now, let's be clear. He has lots of reasons. He's really committed to the timeline because if they don't get it done in time in a certain phase of the moon, when the herd of animals pass, they could miss their opportunity. He only has so many people to work with, so 40 per day made sense given the number of rocks that he thought they needed to be successful. He had a few people who were kind of new to the group, and he wasn't sure that they would get the job done if he didn't give clear expectations like setting out the path, making sure that they hit their goal number. And he felt like maybe if he made people display it publicly, that would motivate them. And as for this whole passing the rock up the hill or tying a small rock to a stick and using it as a spear, he was a little nervous that it might not work out and they'd miss their opportunity. So again, Caveman Chuck had some reasons. Unfortunately for him, the result of their efforts was more nuts and berries and no meat. Our project leader, Chuck, failed to provide a space where his team could share ideas and innovations, to create opportunities to try to innovate things and learn from successes and failure, add value throughout the project, and ultimately make the individuals and his entire village successful. So now let's take a moment to think about projects in our world. Fast forward, so to speak, to our time. In this chat, respond to these questions. Do you think we've evolved from the way our friend Chuck ran his project? Question 2, what is the cost of doing it the way we've always done or the way our friend Chuck ran his project? I'm excited to say that the way we do projects has evolved. So we're going to take a moment just to look at this to provide us with a context. In the 1970s, waterfall project management came to be. And in this type of project management, there are really 6 stages. The first revolves around identifying the requirements. Then the second is design, followed by implementation, testing, deployment, and then maintaining the project. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining these since I'm hoping that while this is an important step in the way we do project management, we're going to talk way beyond that. I will say that waterfall project management does have a few challenges. These include it's high risk because testing happens at the end and not throughout. It can at times stifle innovation because whatever is developed in the design is the path that's laid out for the development team to do the work. And it's the expectation that that development team follow the design. And finally, there's a lack of customer involvement, or in our case, user feedback. You don't continuously go back and forth and gather that throughout the project. So when we think about the landscape of project management, waterfall project management was a step in the right direction. However, the story doesn't end there. I want us to fast forward in time to 2001. In 2001, 17 people gathered to discuss the future of software development. And these people wrote what is known as the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto outlines 4 key values that the group believes are essential to project success. These include individual interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. That isn't to say that the people of this group didn't value the second half of those statements, but they just felt that successful projects really emphasize the first half. We're going to be taking a little bit of a deeper look into some of those statements as we look at modern Agile later in the presentation. I do want to note that if you're viewing this presentation on a phone or a computer, you're probably benefiting from this group's work right now. Major tech giants such as Google and Spotify use Agile thinking in their development of projects. The last thing that I want to point out in the timeline is that in 2010, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland developed what is known as the Scrum Guide. And to me, this framework that they developed really operationalizes those core values that were identified by that team in 2001. So let's take a deeper dive into what Agile is, specifically modern Agile values. When we think about modern Agile, we're really talking about ways to make people awesome. In other words, valuing individuals and interactions over processing and tools. Deliver value continuously. In other words, working software over comprehensive documentation. We're talking about making safety a prerequisite, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and experimenting and learning rapidly, responding to change versus following a plan. When we think about modern Agile, we can translate some of those ideas and values from that initial manifesto into these 4 modern principles. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about each of those. Making people awesome isn't about checking to see who's doing what or when. It isn't about a competition between people in a group, and it isn't about who did it right or who did it wrong. Making people awesome is about recognizing everyone's superpowers and using them to achieve success for the group. It's about finding ways to get the right people to the right work and then crushing the impediments that get in their way so they can get the work done. It's about allowing people to engage in inquiry around the work and celebrating the learning that comes from that investigation and using it to improve project deliverables, or realizing that things won't work, but now the team knows that and they can move forward. Delivering frequently is another one of the modern Agile values. Delivering frequently is not about meeting to share plans about the work that they'll be doing. It's not about meeting quarterly to share out what has been completed. Delivering frequently is about showing products, services, or results that have been completed as it relates to the success of the project, and doing this on a daily or weekly increment. This continuous sharing and transparency allows for the group to adapt the work and address impediments quickly, rather than discovering them months down the road that a certain impediment has been preventing the work from moving forward. Delivering frequently is about reducing the risk because the group and the stakeholders are able to provide feedback more frequently. Making safety a prerequisite isn't about slogging through meetings, being uncertain if your voice should be heard, or worried that what you offer to the group is being judged. Making safety a prerequisite is about creating a space, a climate, and a culture where people feel safe to share their ideas. Making safety a prerequisite is about creating strong relationships so that people feel free to share innovative ideas and take risks. It's all about allowing each group member to have a voice. It's about creating a culture where transparency is the norm, where people can share impediments that are disrupting the work so that the group can problem solve ways to remove the barriers and to crush impediments. It's also about seeing challenges as opportunities and failures as a place to grow. Making safety a prerequisite is about a climate and culture that celebrates small and big wins. Perhaps most importantly, making safety a prerequisite is about assuming positive intent of all members on a team. The fourth and final modern Agile value that I'm going to talk about today is experiment and learn rapidly. Experiment and learn rapidly isn't about following a detailed plan that has been predefined and outlined by individuals who may or may not be participating in the work. It isn't about engaging in a series of predefined tasks, and it isn't about getting so far down a path towards a goal or deliverable that changing directions would result in a catastrophic loss of resources. Experiment and learn rapidly is about trying to identify new ideas, nurturing them, and then reflecting frequently on how it went. If things go well, keep moving down the path. If things aren't going well, then reflect and make some adjustments to the direction that you're moving. Dare I say, it's important to be agile when doing project management. Let's take a moment to reflect. Have you been part of a project where one or more of these values has been present? In the chat, share which values you felt were present and how that impacted the work. For example, can you describe how that impacted the deliverable, the group's climate culture, the efficiency of the group, the individual or group efficacy, or any other aspect of the project? We talked a little bit at the beginning of this presentation about the why we want to do Agile project management. We've looked at the four values, which are a part of the what is Agile, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the how to get from static to Agile. In this next part of the presentation, we're going to be identifying some areas that may already be doing things in an Agile way. We're going to look at who should be doing Agile. And then within those groups of who, how do you strike that balance between static and chaotic? For this next part, I've created a planning template for you to jot down some notes and possibly identify some next steps. As we go through the following slides, take some time to complete the prompts. The document is to be a starting point for planning how to help your agency become more agile. However, don't be surprised if what you jot down changes and grows as you vision out the work within your organization. Also, it's probably likely you're going to find that I missed a category or two along the way. All this is just a place to capture your thoughts as we talk about the different elements of how to be agile. As you start planning, you will want to identify an agile leadership team. Think across your agency for those individuals that play a critical role in the daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly operations of your agency. If you take a look at business, We often find that Agile leadership teams include the CEO, the heads of finance, human resources, technology, operations, and marketing. Take a moment to brainstorm the individuals in your agency who might be part of your Agile leadership team. Now that you've possibly identified a few people who can be on your Agile leadership team, it's also important to identify Agile areas of focus. Not everything in an agency needs to be Agile. As a matter of fact, some parts of an agency might not be a good fit. For example, payroll. I'm not sure if I want payroll people to be implementing Agile and experimenting with my paycheck. Another thing to think about is consider this scenario. In a restaurant, certain features are non-negotiable. Things like making sure that the food is served at the correct temperature, cleanliness, service such as wait times for a seat, etc. These may not be the best places to start being an agile restaurant. That isn't to say never, but might not be the place to start. Being agile in a restaurant really might begin with identifying menu items for future menus, specials of the week, and things like that. Be thoughtful in considering where you want to identify as your agile area of focus. Now that we've identified who will be on your agile leadership team and the area of the work you want to start to grow this agile mindset, let's talk a little bit about finding that balance between static and chaos. We're going to be going over several components that we want you to think about where your agency or your group that you're focusing on is right now, where they might benefit from moving on that continuum between static and chaos. And if so, who do you need to have at the table to push the needle on that component? The first component that we're going to be talking about is purpose and values. The opposite end of the spectrum is the difference between soulless targets and vague and fickle goals. Ideally, you want to be somewhere in the middle, which is around inspired shared goals. To help us understand this component better, I'm going to share a little bit about myself. When I started in education, I taught 7 years at the middle school level. And then after that, I moved to the Iowa Department of Education to be a consultant and work on the rollout of the Iowa core curriculum. And I have to be honest, the DE, the Iowa Department of Ed, was relying on my energy, my willingness to learn, and commitment to the work because when I arrived, oh, so many years ago, I had, so much to learn. One of the first things I did when I arrived was sit in meetings to discuss the vision for the work around the Iowa core. There would be district representation, DE consultants, AEA consultants, individuals from higher ed, and business. and we would discuss the idea of vision and purpose as it related to our work. They knew that they couldn't just put the data in front of people and expect that to inspire them to want to change. However, being young and naive, I just wanted to get to the work. Let's get it done. I also felt that we needed a vision for this work. If we needed a vision for this work, let's just watch this video called Did You Know? This video was pretty popular back around 2008. In it, the video highlights facts about the world that kids were living in then and what they would need eventually to be successful as adults. To me, that was enough vision to get me going. It was inspiring. Now, as I reflect back on those experiences, I know that the individuals in those meetings were tirelessly working to create and inspire shared goals that would concretely move the system forward and make learning better for kids. And that what I thought was inspiring was vague and fickle. As a matter of fact, the video that I loved and was inspired by has since been redone several times because the world itself has shifted. And while the video was inspiring, it didn't provide much clarity around what actually needed to be done. Much like the leaders in those meetings oh so many years ago, we need to work towards a vision that is grounded in data, but also inspiring to get individuals in our agencies to make people awesome, deliver frequently, make safety a prerequisite, and experiment and learn rapidly. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. Strategy is the second component you want to land somewhere between detailed plans and commands and uncoordinated events that lurch in different directions at all different times. The balance you want to strike falls somewhere around adaptive roadmaps. One way to think about this is to hit on what the deliverables are during each increment of work and that what the final deliverable is at the end of the project. Then, as the team begins to work and determine how, they determine the steps they are going to take to get the work done. This allows the team to have ownership over the process that they are using to complete the work and coordinate the efforts so as to avoid inefficiencies. I also want to take a moment to talk about this idea of being adaptive. Groups should be meeting frequently enough to see where the plans may or may not be working and make adjustments as needed. Consider this example. Wendy, Bob, and Dave are working on a PD session. When they are planning out the work, Wendy agrees to design a digital postcard to promote the event on social media. Bob is working on facilities, and David is managing the contract with the external expert. A week into the increment of work, Wendy's computer breaks and she is issued a loaner that doesn't have design software needed to develop the digital postcard. In Agile, the team is meeting frequently, and Wendy shares the impediment to her work. Her team discusses what to do, and in the end, Wendy writes the copy for the postcard. Dave, who feels like he's got his work around the contract is good to go, offers to take the copy and design a postcard and get it to Wendy in time for the social media launch. The increment of work is successfully completed, although the roles and the different tasks assigned to individuals altered throughout the sprint. Key to this is that the group knew enough about each other's work to step in and support each other. They problem solved, and they were meeting often enough to share these impediments that were standing in their way and adapt their roadmap to complete their project. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. Leadership is the third component that we're going to discuss. Leadership should land somewhere between authoritarian taylorism and benign neglect. To help us determine where you are on this continuum and where you might want to move, let's take a moment to learn about the two different ends of the spectrum. Authoritarian Taylorism comes from a man named Frederick Taylor. He worked in the steel industry in the 1870s, and while working, he spent a lot of time investigating the production process and looking for ways to make it more efficient. He was actually obsessed with efficiency. Taylor sought to manage labor scientifically and to think of employees as cogs in a machine, and that they were generally incapable of understanding the science behind their own work. He supported the idea of breaking tasks into small enough increments that the unthinking worker could complete the steps efficiently and successfully. Selection and training of these employees was of little importance. He rather focused on weeding the unfit and disciplining those who could not efficiently and successfully complete their tasks. So again, that's way down on one end of the spectrum. On the other side is benign neglect. Benign neglect is when a leader sees an impediment and rather than assist in trying to crush it, and they hope that the issue will simply go away or resolve itself. Think of it this way. Last summer, I took my kids to the lake beach in Iowa. Now, if you've been to Iowa, it's not quite the beaches of white sand and aqua blue water. That being said, it was still a good time. On the surface, the water was beautiful, and the kids were excited to get out and play. However, after just a few minutes in the water, they all came running back to me complaining that there were rocks in the water and that their feet were hurting. The rocks were impeding their ability to have fun. Now, as a leader of my fearless band of littles, I could have engaged in benign neglect and continued to read my book. However, I took this as an opportunity to help them problem solve. I asked them about the things they could do to still enjoy the water but not hurt their little feet. We brainstormed some ideas, moving locations, playing on floaties, or putting on the water shoes that, oh, dare I say, I had suggested that they put on when we arrived. Within minutes, the entire crew was playing in the water wearing the sturdy shoes I'd packed for just that purpose. In this simple scenario, I was modeling a culture of learning engagement. I didn't demand that they use a specific solution that I had outlined, and I asked them for their input on it. I provided the resources, i.e., the water shoes, so they could test their ideas, and then I let them go back and play, and then report back. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. This next component revolves around planning, budgeting, and reviewing. When we think about Agile, it isn't about implementing the same process over and over year after year, but rather about strategically thinking and implementing a plan that has been adapted or changed based on the results from the previous cycle. On the flip side of this, you don't want to end up in the haphazard system of management, where your organization is simply reacting to feedback and reeling from one effort to the next. You want to strike a balance around dynamic feedback loops. One of the groups that I've had the opportunity to work with structures their work this way. They meet with their project teams on a regular basis and discuss any types of progress that's happening or any potential impediments that may be standing in their way. After those meetings, which are relatively short, sometimes they're time boxed or limited in time to about 15 or 30 minutes at a time, those leaders then go to a meeting where they meet with 3 other groups, project groups leaders, and share information, discuss progress and also impediments, and try to solve any issues that might be coming up that those 3 leaders can address within and amongst their groups. After that, the leaders from each of those 3 groups then meet with the Agile leadership team and give an overall picture of where the work is going within the projects and any kind of impediments doing this. The leaders then can respond with and resources and things like that to support the work. This type of dynamic feedback loop and addressing issues as they come up really helps those groups be productive and deliver frequently. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. This next component is around structure and accountability. It's the balance between bureaucracy and anarchy. So let's think back to our friend Caveman Chuck and his project management style. Project Chuck had a lot of expectations around what things needed to look like, how heavy they needed to be, and he had a whole reporting system on how he wanted people to share out what they've accomplished and measure their success. And while it's always important in an agency to have measures of success and be seeing that people are achieving their targets, we also don't want to tie our consultants down with so much reporting that they don't actually have the time to do the work of creating high quality deliverables for the field. The goal here is to really create what's called bounded autonomy, where people are bound to those inspired shared goals and visions that were created in the first component and able to do the work without being tied down by lots of complex reporting, but really being able to measure their success by the high quality deliverables and the feedback that they receive from stakeholders. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. This last component that I'm going to talk about today is really around your talent engine, the awesome people and consultants who are in your agency right now doing the work. Where you want to land is somewhere between disengaged conformists who just follow directions and do what they're told and impractical inventors. You want to land around collaborative experts. Again, I'm going to take us back to our first story about Project Lead Chuck and his team. He had lots of people who were probably in that disengaged conformist area where they were happy to do exactly what he said laid out on the path. He also had a couple of inventors. Remember the two in the story who were like, hey, what if instead of each of us carrying our own rocks, we pass them from one person to the next up to the top of the hill? Or the guy who was like, oh, let's try that sharp rock and tie it to a stick and try shooting that at animals. Those guys are those inventors. Now, whether they were impractical inventors is yet to unknown. But here's where we want to balance that idea of conformists who just follow the plan and those people who might have ideas that are outside the scope of the project or outside of the resources that are available. What you want to land on is collaborative experts, people who can discuss and share ideas and then recognize when something may or may not fit with the vision and goals of the project. That balance between disengaged conformists and impractical inventors. We want to land somewhere right around collaborative experts. Take a moment to identify where you are on this component. I want to take a moment now to introduce Katie Evenson, the Executive Director of Educational Services at Northwest AEA. Last winter, Katie attended our Agile Scrum training for the classroom, and was really excited because she not only saw the benefits of using Agile and Scrum with students, but she could also see it benefiting her agency and the consultants that work within it. After some conversations, she invited us to facilitate a training for her staff. And that training occurred in August and September of this past year. It was a little different than we intended because we were doing this training virtually versus face to face. But Katie's going to just tell us a little bit about her vision for this work and how her AEA is moving forward.
Hi, my name is Katie Evenson, and I'm the Director of Educational Services, Media, and Technology for Northwest Area Education Agency. We are an intermediary agency in the state of Iowa, supported by public funding to provide services and support for our local schools in the 10 counties we serve. Iowa has 9 AEAs. We are the one in the northwest corner, clever, I know, of Iowa. After attending a workshop, a 2-day workshop on Agile and its use in the classroom, my brain started turning around, wow, this could be a great project management system for consultants in our AEA. We asked Deborah and Laura to provide training for our consultants, and due to COVID, they turned a 2-day face-to-face training into a 5 half days virtual training. Through this training, we have learned how we can use Agile as a method to help us with our various projects. We have many teams that have several different team members, and they needed some form to be able to track what was going on with each of their projects, who was doing which action, and where they actually were in the process. Agile provides a great framework for that. It really gives them a visual of what's happening, what is waiting to happen, and what's actually done. So it's a great visual way to be able to communicate with each other around steps that have been taken in order to complete a project. We also subscribe to the 4 values that the Agile framework really purports. So we try our best to make people awesome, to be flexible and experiment and learn rapidly. We also believe in safety, and not just physical safety, but mental safety, so that everyone can work in the way they need to work. And we also, of course, as an intermediary agency, want to be able to deliver value to our schools. So we have been using this project management system just starting this year. We have been using virtual Scrum boards, so anyone, anywhere could be able to see what is happening in the project and how it's going. We have been using daily stand-ups. We don't do them daily, but we do have them at least monthly so people can check in on what's happening with the project they're working on and which pieces they have completed. The Agile mindset and framework work very well with some other formats that we have learned recently and been using. For example, it meshes very well with Lencioni's advantage and all the thinking in those structures in his book. And it also works well with the 4 disciplines of execution that Covey helped to write. So we really see that those all work together in order to make projects run smoothly, meet the need of those that we are creating them for, and give each of our employees a visual of work that's done, which is really encouraging and motivating to be able to see what you've done in an industry that sometimes is hard to see your impact.
Thanks, Katie, for sharing how Northwest AEA is working to become a more agile agency. In this presentation today, we've talked a little bit about the evolution of project management, why we would want to do Agile, what Agile is, and examine some ways to start thinking about how to be more Agile as an agency. I hope you've been able to start to formulate some thoughts around it and some ideas that you want to continue to explore as you think about becoming more Agile.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we'd love the opportunity to continue this conversation and answer questions. If you'd like to, you can continue to write questions or thoughts in the chat and we'll be monitoring that. Or you can also go to the Zoom room that we've connected with the link or the QR code on the screen and join us for some real-time conversation about becoming an Agile agency. Thank you so much for attending, and I look forward to talking with you soon.